This time I'll show you an easy way to fit those awkward fish plates, an accurate way of measuring track power, whether your layout's DC or DCC, and a great way of labelling your wiring. Roll the intro. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie. And hopefully you saw last week's video. It was my 100th video and a bit of a celebration of the channel, a few bloopers and everything else, and there should be a link up here if you missed it. During the video I did a bit of explanation about how YouTube works, and hopefully you've watched it and understand the importance of subscribing to a channel. And the reason I mentioned subscribing is because it's a rubbish word really. Subscribe kind of means subscription, and subscription, there isn't a charge. A subscription, this is free. Perhaps YouTube ought to use the word follow rather than subscribe. Anyway, please subscribe to the channel and give me a thumbs up, because that's the sort of thing that the algorithm likes, and therefore YouTube videos then sort of go up the rankings and it's spread further in the model railway community. There we go. So thank you very much. And I only had to ban 2 people from the channel for absolutely dreadful swearing, abusive comments and everything else. So if you think of having a YouTube channel yourself, they're still out there. Right, let's get on to model railways, and in particular we'll start with fitting fish plates. And here's how we do it. This is a piece of Pico Code 100 track, and that's a Code 100 fish plate, and this is an old piece of track. And what I need to do is I need to cut off a short length of this track and pull it out, and this becomes the tool on how to fit the fish plate. And the idea is you put something like a 45-degree bend in the end of this rail and turn it up, so that when you feed the fish plate on, it won't go all the way on, it will just stop a few millimeters up. So if I get a pair of mole grips and just grip the end and then bend it up, and then what I can do is fit the fish plate to the rail, which is much easier to do sort of in the air, and then simply slide the fish plate onto the track. It couldn't really be easier, could it? You might need to just grip it with a pair of pliers as you pull the tool away, because it could just come off, with the tool, if you see what I mean. It could come back off. So I'll just do it again in close-up. So feed the fish plate onto the end of the tool, offer it up to the rail, and just poke it on. And then you may need just to grip the fish plate so it stays on the rail. And there we go. And if of course you have a bit of a shaky grip or whatever, it does make it easier, because the only other way of doing it, of course, as we all know, is we're forever trying to do this, aren't we? We're trying to get down there and trying to push it on, and it isn't that easy. We get there in the end, but a little bit of ingenuity. I'd love to lay claim for this idea myself, but it was a tip left to me by somebody else. So just a little bend in the end, and away you go. Absolutely free. So now moving on to track power. Now a few weeks ago I did a video on how to construct guards van tail lights, both forward and rear facing tail lights. Doesn't kind of make sense, does it? Using DCC Concepts guards van lights, and there should be a link just up here on how I did it, and it was suitable for both DC and DCC layouts. And because of that, I spoke to a gentleman called Richard from DCC Concepts, and during that conversation he mentioned whether I'd like to do a review of his Alpha Meter DCC AVA.1, and being that kind of guy, I said, yeah, stick it in the post and I'll see what I think. And total disclosure, this is for me to keep. It's a freebie. Whether I like it or not, I will be totally honest, though I have already asked a good friend of mine who's had his for around 6 months for his views, which I'll come on to. So there we go. It's a freebie. It's for me to keep, but please don't think this will influence my verdict. So what's in the box? Well, there is a set of basic instructions, which are all straightforward. There's a cutting template, so you can draw out the measurements for a hole within a control panel, so you can fit this. There's even some screws to go with it. There's 2 connector blocks for the power in and the power out, and of course the panel itself. And it's a kind of a, what would you call it, a brushed aluminium kind of feel to it, and it's rather nice. There appears to be a peel back, what do you call it, anti-scratch piece of film over the screen, which obviously you can take off in the fullness of time. And there's a light on the O for concepts. There's an LED that shines through there, and obviously your 4 countersunk holes. So that's all straightforward. And then turn it over and looking at the back, here's your input side and there's your output side where these obviously connectors go in. So that looks pretty simple. I think what I should do with this now is fit it into a temporary little enclosure and then get a rolling road out, connect it out to some DCC and see how it works. Okay, for the DC test, what I thought we would use is a Helgian Western, which is DCC ready, but it's not chipped, so it's straight DC on my rolling road. And we've got one of the fittings for the alpha meter fitted, and also on the end of this very, very high-tech duet, there's the other one. So just a straight DC test, and just for the record, what I'm going to do is turn the duet up onto full and measure the voltage coming out of the duet with my meter, which says 13.53 is what it's measuring. It actually says minus 13.5, so if I turn it the other way it will be plus, so it's plus 13.5253, 13.52, let's call that 13.5 volts. So it may be getting a little bit tired, but these things don't hold their accuracy forever, so it's worth keeping an eye on that. Right, so turn it off, and here is the back of the panel that I've constructed. And there it is, all straightforward. I've just cut a hole in a little bit of MDF, painted it black, popped it through, and I haven't removed the piece of film from the panel, just in case it then reflects into the camera lens. And there are the 2 connector blocks. There's the out to the track and there's the in from the DCC. So what could be more straightforward than just to simply plug this one into there? That's the output side. Make sure this is off, yep, and then plug in the input side. Now I've read the instructions. Funny old thing, blokes don't usually do that, do they? So I've read the instructions, and it says that it will only indicate in one direction because it's DCC, so you can only carry out this function in one direction. I'm sorry, I keep getting my DCs and my DCCs around the wrong way. Right, I've turned down the lights in the room, so hopefully you'll be able to see the panel. Now you might see the LEDs flicker a little. They don't in reality, it's just the way it comes out on the camera. So if I turn power on and the light goes green and we start to show voltage, so the voltage now I'm putting into the track is 3.83, and it's not drawing any current at all yet. I keep turning it and I can start to hear the wheels start to turn, I believe. There they go. So it gets underway at 6.38 volts and draws 0.4 of an amp to do so. If I just take it back a little bit. So on a very slight crawl now, we're at 5.3 volts and 0.35 of an amp. And then I'll bring the power right up. We're now at 12.34 volts and it's drawing 0.56 of an amp. So using it for a DC layout, it's one way of telling if your loco is more or less healthy than another. Now if I turn it the other way, the loco will run, but you don't get any indications on the alpha meter. So what's the point of having it on a DC layout? Well, you could use it on a test bench prior to putting your locos into service to check they're working properly, and also you could use it for fault finding. I know in particular that certain Helgen locos have a very high stall current. They don't get going until they have a fair old whack behind them. So it is useful, not exactly the same as on a DCC layout, but you could use one of these per transformer fitted to your layout just to check things are running well. And of course the voltage on a DC layout changes the further you get away from the power input into the track, especially on big tail chasers. So it might well come in handy for a DC layout. However, I'm a DCC kind of guy, so let's see how we get on with that. So that was really DC, but it is worth mentioning that it's easy to measure voltage on a DC layout. You just go and stick the prongs on the rails. But to measure the current being drawn, you will obviously must have some kind of an ammeter in the circuit to do it for you. And that can be a bit expensive, but I understand how the advantage of having one of these in that circuit. But if you've got 3 or 4 different circuits, then sadly you need 3 or 4 different ones of these. And that's no cheap option. However, with DCC, things are changing, because now all we need to do is go between our controller and the track, because all the track has the same power, unless of course you split it into power districts. But you can always put this in before you split into the power districts. So just to get technical for a minute, if you can see the green line is at 0 volts, an AC waveform goes like this. It's known as a sinusoidal waveform. It goes from a plus voltage to a minus voltage, and you would measure it with one of these ordinary type meters, no problem. However, DCC isn't like that. DCC is actually a square waveform. It's not AC at all, and you cannot measure it with an ordinary meter, and that's where the advantage of this alpha meter comes in, because it does this properly. If you were to stick that meter on a DCC layout, I mean, you could be recording anything here really at say at plus 24 volts to minus 24 volts instead of reading sort of 12 volts. It just doesn't really work. You could make it more complicated and talk about RMS and 0.707, and if you know what you're talking about, you understand that, and I really don't want to go into that. It's just a case of saying that an ordinary meter doesn't read a square waveform properly. It'll get you in the zone, but it won't give you a true voltage. I hope that sort of means something to the great unwashed, let's say, like me really. And one other thing I did forget to mention is that it's a maximum of 10 amps for both DC and DCC. Right, let's turn this on properly and have a look how it works. So I've turned the lights down once more, and what we have here this time is a Helgen Hymec fitted, I believe, with a Locksound 3.5 chip and an ordinary little 100 ohm speaker. And I'm obviously using my trusty old Dynamis. I do like the Dynamis because it's very simple to program locos, as opposed to taking them onto the main layout, which is Digitrack's layout. Nothing wrong with that either, but I like to use this because it keeps things simple. So everything's turned off, and if I turn the power on, then we get a blue light comes up. It shows that there are 14.8 0.188 volts applied to the track, and this loco that's turned off is drawing 0.01 of an amp, and that's because the chip is always on. And if you have 20 locos on your layout, then clearly you're going to be drawing 0.2 before your locos do any work at all. So if we just do something like start this loco up on the sound side and see what happens to the ammeter. So as you can see, the sound system draws very little. Even if I start blasting away on the horn, you see it pop up there to 0.2. Right, let's put a little bit of power in. And this is now on full power. At full speed, and it's drawing 0.3 of an amp, 3.5, 3.4, and it's stable at around about 0.3. I'll bring it down and I shall turn the power and the sound off, just so we can hear each other, as it were. And as we can see, the track power is steady at sort of around about 14.5 volts. And this loco draws considerably less current than that Helgian Western. But of course the great advantage now with this little gizmo is when I fit it to my main layout, I can see what all the locos are drawing on all the tracks, with sound on and sound off and coach lighting and guards van lighting and everything else. So if you were to put this, like say, in between the controller and the tracks, then you'll get a power consumption value for the whole layout. Now, I mentioned earlier that a friend of mine has one of these alpha meter and he uses it on his Highbridge exhibition layout, which you can see here. And at the other end of his railway room, he has like a workstation. And in the workstation, that's where he has embedded his alpha meter so that he can do all his testing of his locomotives prior to departing on the exhibition circuit. So he knows that everything he's got is up and running. Does he like it? Yes, he does. He thinks it's a pretty good, nifty piece of kit and he wouldn't be without it now. An excellent meter, reasonably priced, which is an invaluable aid to setting up locomotives on his exhibition railway. Just in case you've never seen me with my stupid hat on, it's because I keep banging my head underneath the baseboards. So what I'm doing now is just connecting up to the alpha, the two input cables, and I have these little printed labels which I'll come to in the next segment of this video, and these are little heat shrink sleeves. And on this one it says power in. And on the end of there I need to put one of my bootlace ferrules. As a matter of interest, the cable I'm using here, this is 8 amp cable, and this is the maximum that this Digitrack DCS 240 can kick out. So I just crimp the ferrules on onto the second one, power in, and then over to one of the connector blocks. And these aren't polarity conscious or whatever, it's just a case of poking the cables in and screwing them up. And the ferrules, I think I've covered them in a previous video, they just make things so much easier rather than trying to twist little bits of wire and hope you don't miss a strand, which then goes and wanders and shorts out with another cable. I don't know if you can see that, but That's how it looks there with the two cables with the power in. So I shall connect that up to the input and then do the same with the output. And that's the power out complete. So we'll plug that one in and go for a switch on. But there's the panel you saw me painting earlier, and obviously I've been underneath it and installed it. I had to do a little cutout for the rivet, and it's just an old piece of MDF that I had lying around, and as I said, a couple of coats of children's poster paints in black, and that was that really. So there's the alpha panel in situ. I've also installed one of the Digitrax control panels and one of these little sexy pockets to put your remote in, and then underneath here eventually there will be a black curtain and a simile around the rest of the layout. So there we go. Now I do live switch-ons because if I was to turn this on prior to filming it and it went bang, you'd never know, and I wouldn't be able to kind of end the video really. So this is a remote that turns on the railway system on button C. Ooh. And that was all the points, the tortoise points changing over. So what have I got? I've got 15.3 volts and I'm drawing 0.37 of an amp. And the reason I'm doing that is because of the locos that are on the layout. They've all got chips in. So that's how it goes. Right. Looks like we've got success. What I'll do again is I'll flash up this high mech now. And see what happens when I just get this one running. So it's loco 7026, and hopefully this should turn the sound on. Yes, it does. Beautiful. And hopefully run it off. The points against it. How embarrassing. Right. There we go. Anyway, let's just reverse that back out. Okay, time for me now to clear the layout, connect up the tracks and run a set of trains and see how much power we really pull. Well, as you can see, we're currently pulling 0.7 of an amp, which is quite surprising really when you consider the amount of locos that are going around the layout. There's this Western pulling a passenger train, there's a high mech with a freight train, and there's a 125 unit running around, and there are another 1, 2, 3 locos with sound all switched on, and a further 1, 2, 3, 4 locos just sitting on the tracks, and all we're pulling at the moment is 0.7 of an amp, and we're running at 14.5 volts. And I must confess, I find that rather surprising. I had naturally thought that these locos would pull so much more power. It's quite incredible, isn't it? What I shall do now, it's going to be a mistake, is turn the speed up on the locos and see if we get much change in the power. So things are happening a little quicker. I've just got to stop the Western catching up with a 125. And we're still only up to 0.8 of an amp, which I find quite incredible. Well, I think that's a pretty good test of the alpha meter. I really didn't expect it to perform that well, to be honest. And you know, it is surprising how little current these things draw. Having said that, my wiring is pretty good. I've used good sized cables on the runs, so you're not going to get much power loss on those runs, so therefore you're not going to draw more power. So what do I think of it? For a DC layout, I'm not too sure. If you've got a substantial amount of locomotives, you can test them on a sort of a test bench, then it makes perfect sense. On any good sized DCC layout, such as a tail chaser such as this, then I think it's pretty much essential. It's a pity I can't afford 4 to break it down to the power districts, but having said that, what am I going to pull in each district? Very little power. So I think we are good where we are, really. If you're a member of a model railway club, I would suggest that your club layouts get one, because, you know, financially there probably isn't such an issue. But home layouts, if it's of a reasonable size, I think it's a good investment. And of course, we always talk about money. Well, how much is it? Well, it's actually just under £60. But the value of the money isn't necessarily what's important to me. What I tend to think about is, what else can I buy? So is it worth 2 Hornby coaches? Yeah, probably is. 3 guards vans? Yeah, it probably is. So on that sort of measure, then I think it's worth investing. And this thing will stick around for years, long after you've sold locomotives that have been replaced by better models and that sort of thing. So yes, I'd go for it. I think DCC Concepts have done a very good thing with it. I must confess, their whole range is very tactile in some way. It's a good design feature. And if you're after one of those, there'll be a link to DCC Concepts in the Show More tab below. Right, let's talk about printing ID sleeves for cables. Now, for those that are regulars on this channel, you may know that I have an unhealthy yearning for good wiring. I enjoy my wiring. I like it. I like it to be faultless, and generally speaking, it is pretty good. But I do I go the extra mile, let's say, with my wiring. And a couple of years ago, I found a website, a YouTube channel called Digitrack's Dad, and I looked at his wire and I thought, blimey, how does he do that? Sent him a couple of emails, but sadly, I don't think he's around. There's no answers and there's no more emails. And then I had an email from a chap called Martin, and Martin and I have had a chat, and he sent me a couple of pictures and of his wiring. And as you can see here, it's rather neat, isn't it? He's obviously another DCC Concepts enthusiast, but you can see by the cable IDs that he's found a cable printing solution. And the solution is made by Brother, and it's a P-Touch E300, and it's this beast here. If I just take the back off, there's a rechargeable battery, and then your tape, which you use to print on. And you can print ordinary ID tags or little tapes or whatever. Or you can print onto heat shrink tubing. So the one that's in here is a white heat shrinkable tube, as it were, and I can use it on the layout for the more complex pieces, if you like. And I've used it on the feeds to the alpha meter, the feeds and the returns to the alpha meter, because, you know, I can really, and it avoids confusion when you're underneath that board there. It makes things a lot easier. So, you know, should you invest in something like this? Well, compared to the alpha meter, it's a little more expensive. I think this was 95 quid, and the tapes are £25 for only 1.5 meters of the tubing, and some of it gets wasted as you print out. But it looks like we found another supplier that does the tapes at £11, so it is quite useful. But if you're into printing cable IDs, then this might just be the product for you. I like it, but then again, I'm a little bit of a wiring enthusiast. And here's a couple of images of the stuff that I've printed. So here you can see the cable IDs going to the underside of the DCC Concepts alpha meter. All straightforward, and I haven't used a heat shrink gun on that. I haven't waved a stolen hairdryer from my wife over this. It is just what it is. and similarly on the backboard you can see where those come in. But it's a thing that might be worth investing if you're running a complex wiring solution or if you're running different power districts. Just something to think about. Anyway, if you're interested in one of these little beasties, then you'll find it in the Amazon tag below in the show more tab. So there we go. Something I quite like, not to everyone's liking, but it's an interesting product. So for next week, we're back into the hillside and the rock faces of the cutting where the locals would go through that cutting and then off into the industrial unit. And I've got some plans to share with you on how that industrial unit is going to take shape. On a more serious note, without support from the patrons, I don't think the channel would survive. I really couldn't afford the time. So my patrons, I thank you most sincerely. And if you'd like to become a patron and help me support the channel for $2 or $5 or whatever a month, then please click the link and don't forget to subscribe. It is free, and perhaps give us a thumbs up and a share. And until next week, there should be a video here and here, and I'll see you next Friday. Take care. Bye bye.